Have you ever met a stranger, and in just one fleeting moment, everything you once believed about life suddenly shifted? A young woman, working part-time at a restaurant during Thanksgiving, carelessly blurts out a seemingly innocent remark. "My mom had a ring just like yours," completely unaware that the man sitting across from her is one of the most powerful CEOs in America. What appears to be a throwaway comment becomes the first piece in a long-buried puzzle, uncovering a secret hidden for more than 20 years. A story about forbidden love, the pride of a single mother, and the battle between status and truth. And then, the most unexpected thing happens. From two strangers, they must learn how to become a family. Stay until the end. Some truths can only be found after the most seemingly aimless steps. On an early November evening, as amber and orange maple leaves began to drift onto the sidewalks, and the crisp New York air hinted that the holiday season was approaching, a young man named Jamie Carter rushed through the service hall with a birthday cake in his hands. Jamie, 25 years old, was a part-time waiter at a restaurant located in the Bryant Place shopping center. He had a slender build and light brown hair that was always windblown whenever he stepped out the back door of the kitchen. He wasn't wealthy, and no one backed him. His mother had passed away when he was in high school, and his father was long out of the picture. Since then, Jamie had fought his way through college tuition, rent, and restaurant jobs, hoping that each day that passed was another day he hadn't given up. Tonight, a private birthday party was being held in the VIP room on the second floor. Jamie was assigned to serve the main table, where one particular guest was seated, the one everyone simply referred to as the boss. But as Jamie set the cake down, his eyes froze for a split second, and his heart skipped a beat. The man seated at the center, in a perfectly tailored black suit, and with the calm demeanor of someone who was no stranger to power, was smiling faintly at the guest beside him. But Jamie noticed something else, a small detail. A gold ring with a deep green stone that glinted under the warm yellow lights. Almost without thinking, Jamie said, "Sorry, but my mom used to have a ring just like that." His voice trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from a memory suddenly flaring up like an old wound. The room went unusually quiet, and the eyes of the woman across the table, Calista Morgan, a legendary name in luxury real estate, slowly turned toward Jamie, filled with unmistakable shock. At that very moment, neither of them could have imagined that one accidental sentence about a long-forgotten ring would unravel a secret buried for over 2 decades and change their lives forever. Right after Jamie mentioned the ring, Calista Morgan, the 42-year-old powerhouse CEO and founder of Morgan and Hawthorne Properties, froze, as if she'd just heard a phrase that reached down and yanked something from the deepest recesses of her past. For a brief second, the usual composure on her face gave way to a rare, visible unease. She looked at Jamie for a long moment, then gently placed her wine glass down, her sharp gaze still fixed on the young man now standing awkwardly beside the cake. "You said your mother had a ring like this?" Calista asked slowly, turning the emerald-studded ring on her finger, a piece she'd worn since she was very young. Jamie nodded, a little hesitant. He could feel the attention of the entire room focused on him, from wealthy partners to fellow waitstaff. But he continued, his voice soft but firm. "Yes. Gold band, green stone, and there were letters engraved inside. I remember clearly. My mom said it was a keepsake, but never explained where it came from. Later, she passed away, and all I had was an old photo of her wearing it." Calista leaned back in her chair, fingers interlaced, her eyes suddenly distant. About 20 years ago, during a holiday stay at the Blue Pines Hotel in Maine, when Calista was still a young entrepreneur fresh out of Harvard, she'd had a brief but profound romance. The man was a young chef and amateur artist, passionate and simple, named Robert Dawson. Their relationship ended as quickly as it began, cut short when Calista was urgently called back to take over the family business and prepare for a $100 million deal with an international investment group. She had never spoken of that time again, but the ring, a parting gift she left behind in that tiny room, stayed in her mind. She'd had a duplicate made, as if clinging to something she never should have let go. Now, a young man was standing before her, claiming that his mother owned that ring. Through the years, the age, the details, Calista murmured almost in disbelief. "Robert." Jamie heard the name. He looked up. "Robert was my father," he said quietly, "but he passed away when I was little." I never knew anything about my parents' relationship. My mom never talked about the woman who gave her that ring. The room seemed to fall into deeper silence. Guests discreetly turned away, giving space to the private moment unfolding between the two. And right then, Calista Morgan, a woman who had never let emotion interfere with business or personal life for 2 decades, suddenly realized a memory had come to life. Flesh and blood, standing right in front of her. One question echoed through her mind, simple but earth-shaking. If that's Robert's son, then could it be? The following morning, with mist still clinging to the glass on the 48th floor of Morgan and Hawthorne Tower, Calista sat quietly in her office, holding a photo Jamie had emailed her the night before. In the worn-out picture, a red-haired woman sat by the sea, eyes smiling gently, a green stoned ring on her finger. No doubt about it, it was the same ring. The ring Calista had left behind in the summer of 2000, beside an unsigned handwritten note saying goodbye. Calista clenched her hands. A rush of emotion overtook her as she stood up and walked toward the large window overlooking the city. The morning sunlight hit the ring on her hand, a replica, identical to the original, but somehow far colder. Jamie Dawson, she repeated the name. 23 years old, born in the spring of 2001. The timeline matched perfectly. This was no longer a coincidence. That very afternoon, Calista asked her personal assistant Monica to schedule a private meeting with Jamie, not at the company. Somewhere more personal, more intimate. On Saturday night, under the warm lights of a small restaurant in historic Brooklyn, Jamie stepped into a space that felt both elegant and welcoming. His eyes scanned the room before settling on the woman sitting alone in the corner. Her posture was upright, her eyes calm. She was no longer the powerful CEO from the other night, just a woman, waiting for an answer she hadn't dared to believe. Jamie approached, hesitating slightly. "Thank you for inviting me," he said. Calista nodded, motioning for him to sit. No assistant, no security, just the two of them. A meeting she knew could change everything if the story was true. After a few moments of silence, she spoke. "Jamie, I won't beat around the bush. I once knew your father, Robert Dawson. We met at a small hotel in Bar Harbor during the summer of 2000. It was a summer unlike any I've ever had." Jamie remained silent, his hands gently tightening. "He once told me there was someone who changed the way he saw everything," Jamie said quietly. "A young woman, brilliant, from a different world. But he never mentioned your name." Calista smiled faintly, a sad smile. "Maybe. He thought it was his way of protecting everyone. But you know, he was a remarkable man. And if you are Robert's son, then I believe I've owed you the truth for a very long time." Jamie looked at her, surprised. Then his expression softened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old necklace. "This belonged to my mother. She kept it all her life. The pendant has initials engraved on the back, CM. I never knew what they meant, but now I think I do." Calista took the necklace, her fingers trembling slightly. It was a gift she had once brought with her, left behind in Robert's room. The only thing he kept, and perhaps later passed on to Jamie's mother. Silence settled between them. Then, Calista sighed, looked up, and spoke with quiet resolve. "Jamie, I want to do a DNA test. I need to be sure, not for reputation or responsibility, but because my heart won't rest until I face this." Jamie nodded, gently. "And if the result confirms what we think?" Calista didn't hesitate. "Then you're my son, and everything changes." When Jamie left the restaurant that night, still holding the old photograph and the weathered necklace, he knew a new chapter of his life was about to begin. But he also knew this wasn't just his story. It was a story of choices, of regrets, and of people brave enough to look back in order to find the truth. 1 week after the dinner in Brooklyn, on a quiet Sunday morning, Jamie stood outside a private clinic in the Upper East Side, where Calista had discreetly arranged for the DNA test. He took a deep breath before stepping inside. His mind was full of questions, none yet answered. But deep in his heart, he felt something, a vague calling from memory, from love he never knew, from a half of his bloodline forgotten for nearly 2 decades. A few days later, Calista leaned against the window ledge in her private office on the 50th floor of the Morgan Regency Hotel, a secluded space far from stiff boardrooms, where she often went to reflect on her life. Monica entered, holding a carefully sealed envelope. "The test results, Miss Calista." She said nothing, just reached out, took the envelope, and opened it. Her eyes scanned the printed words quickly. Probability of biological relationship, mother-son, 99.98%. Conclusion, Jamie Dawson is the biological son of Calista Morgan. Calista tightened her grip on the papers, her eyes stinging, but not a single tear fell. Instead, she exhaled like a weight had finally lifted from her chest. She whispered, almost to herself, "So, it's true." That afternoon, Jamie was called to the hotel. Calista wore no suit, no jewelry, no polished makeup, as usual. She was already seated at a table near the balcony, where the soft glow of the sunset spilled in. On the table was a photo frame, an old picture of Catherine, Jamie's mother, smiling in the sunlight along with a copy of the test results. Jamie entered. When their eyes met, there was no longer any doubt. Calista spoke softly, her voice unsteady but firm. "You are my son." Jamie stepped closer, sat across from her. For a long while, neither of them said anything. Then Calista gently placed her hand on the table, her finger brushing the edge of Catherine's photo. "She was a good woman," she said. "She never reached out to me after that summer. But not a day passed that I didn't think about what happened, and the child I might have lost." Jamie was speechless. He nodded. "Me too. Even without knowing, I always felt like something was missing, something I couldn't name." Calista handed him the ring, a replica of the original. "I had it remade, after giving the old one back to your father. Now it's yours, if you want to keep it." Jamie took it and carefully slid it onto his finger. It fit perfectly. A quiet moment passed like a thread of blood had just been reconnected between the two of them. A few days later, Calista hosted a small event at the hotel, officially a fundraiser for a charity, but in truth, it was a quiet occasion to introduce Jamie as a member of her family. Under the warm lights, when Jamie stepped into the ballroom dressed simply, yet exuding quiet confidence, the room paused for a beat. Most didn't know who he was, but they sensed one thing clearly. Calista Morgan never did anything without reason. She walked over to Jamie and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "My son," she said, her voice firm yet tender. "Jamie Dawson." Applause erupted, then spread throughout the room. The early murmurs dissolved, overtaken by one undeniable truth: not wealth, not status, but the proud eyes of a mother for the first time in her life. Jamie smiled, and in his eyes was something he'd never known in 23 years: recognition. A place he belonged. 3 days after the event, on a damp New York morning, Jamie woke earlier than usual. In his small, aging apartment in Queens, he stood by the foggy window, holding the ring with the emerald stone, a gift from Calista. He turned it over in his hand, feeling both warmth and unfamiliarity. He still wasn't used to being Calista Morgan's son. On paper, it sounded monumental, like a destined turning point. But deep down, Jamie was still a cafe barista, still someone raised in scarcity, still sharing a rented apartment with 3 roommates. And most of all, he was still a son who had never truly known what having a mother meant. That afternoon, Calista invited Jamie to her private residence in the Upper West Side. Not a hotel, not a boardroom, her actual home. A place she rarely allowed anyone into. Jamie entered cautiously. The house was quiet, tasteful, and warm. But as he stepped into the living room lined with abstract paintings and thick, leather-bound business books, that sense of unfamiliarity returned. Calista was making tea. Not the maid, not Monica. She made it herself, as if to say something through action. "Did you have breakfast?" Jamie smiled faintly. "Just coffee." They sat down at a wooden table, surrounded by an oddly still silence. Calista handed him a folder. "This is an internal scholarship from the Morgan Foundation. It's for a master's program in management at Columbia. If you ever want to shift careers..." Jamie slowly put down his teacup. "You mean, you want me to leave the cafe?" Calista nodded, deliberately. "You're smart, principled, and have a good heart. I believe you deserve the chance to do more." Jamie fell silent. For a moment, it felt like he was being pulled away from his real life. Not because the offer was unkind, but because it was too big, too sudden. He inhaled deeply. "Don't you think I might need time?" Calista looked at him, her gaze softening. "I know. I lost more than 20 years not being there for you. But you have to understand, I'm trying to make up for what I missed." That sentence struck a deep scar in Jamie. He placed his hand on the table, speaking gently. "I don't need you to fix it. I just need you to be here." The room went still. Only the clock ticked away the minutes. Calista looked at her son, not angry, not accusing, just asking for connection. Not through scholarships, not through status, but through time, presence, and real emotion. She nodded, for the first time, learning to step back as a mother. "All right, then I'll be here." Bit by bit. That evening, back in his apartment, Jamie told everything to Cass, his close roommate, the one who knew every upheaval he'd just gone through. "You're afraid of being swallowed up by her world, huh?" Cass said, pouring him a glass of cheap wine. Jamie nodded. "Yeah, it's so big, and I'm not ready to be changed by it." Cass smiled faintly. "You don't need to change to fit into their world. You just need to stay you. So they realize how lucky they were to find you." Jamie chuckled, a little tension lifting. He sank into the worn-out sofa, eyes drifting up to the cracked ceiling. Not glamorous, not grand, but real. And in that moment, he knew he wasn't ready to step fully into the Morgan world. But he wasn't closing the door on it either. 3 weeks after the meeting at her home, Jamie was slowly getting used to having Calista Morgan in his life, tentatively, carefully, but sincerely. They had lunch every Tuesday at a small restaurant in Riverside Park. No paparazzi, no assistants, no theatrics. But peace doesn't last forever. On a Friday morning in early November, while Jamie was working the morning shift at the cafe, his phone began buzzing nonstop. At first, just a few messages, then a call from Cass. "Jamie, have you seen the news?" "No, I'm at the shop. What happened?" "Check the internet. Right now." Jamie wiped his hands on his apron and opened his phone. A major finance news site splashed a bold headline: "Calista Morgan's illegitimate son, shocking family revelation." Below the sensational headline was a photo of him taken at the recent birthday event, standing beside Calista, smiling. The colors enhanced, the message loud and clear, without needing a single word more. Jamie's stomach sank. A few hours later, outside the Morgan Foundation headquarters, reporters crowded the entrance, microphones pointing at anyone coming or going. The internal communications manager quickly reached out to Jamie, urging him to stay home for a few days. "This will blow over. Something else will hit the news cycle soon, and they'll forget." Jamie gave a half-hearted smile. It seemed everyone in Calista's world was used to dodging, concealing, and negotiating the truth, but he didn't. That night, in their Queens apartment, Jamie sat beside Cass, eyes fixed on the TV screen, playing a social commentary program where unfamiliar faces dissected his life like it was just another talking point. "What are you going to do?" Cass asked gently. Jamie was quiet for a long while before he finally replied, "Face it, but not on their terms." 2 days later, at an unexpected press conference organized by the Morgan Foundation, there was no grand stage, no booming sound system, just a modest conference room, a few dozen reporters, and soft lighting. Calista stepped forward. "No flashy jewelry, no meticulously made-up face like usual. I'm Calista Morgan, and yes, Jamie is my son." The room fell silent for a beat. For years, I stayed silent about an important part of my life, a decision I didn't have the courage to correct sooner. But today, I choose truth over perfection. I choose family over reputation. Then she turned toward Jamie, and I know I still have much to learn to become a mother worthy of that title. Jamie stepped up, taking the microphone. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes were clear. "I'm not a CEO. I'm not an heir. I'm just a son who wanted to know who his mother was." He paused, took a breath. "If anyone's looking for a sensational ending to this story, I'm sorry it's not going to end that way. I don't want wealth. I don't need a title. I'm simply beginning a journey that should have started 23 years ago." The room didn't stay silent out of shock, but out of emotion. After the press conference in the car, Calista didn't speak. She just looked at Jamie and let out a long, slow breath. "You did well." Jamie smiled faintly. "For the first time in my life, I feel free." Calista turned to look at her son. In her eyes shimmered something both unfamiliar and long overdue: pride. In the days following, the media slowly began to move on. The sensational headlines faded, replaced by newer scandals and stories. Jamie went back to the cafe. People still looked at him a few seconds longer than before, but no one asked questions anymore. He also began getting used to a new version of his mother, not Calista Morgan from the magazines, but the woman who quietly texted each morning to ask what he ate or whether he'd slept okay. Not perfect, but trying, little by little. One early winter afternoon, in her old house on the west side of New York, Calista opened a wooden wardrobe in her bedroom, a place she hadn't touched in 23 years. Inside, everything was just as she had left it. A gray velvet box, lightly covered in dust. She placed it on the table and opened the lid. Inside were things that time hadn't managed to blur: a black and white photo of her, and a young man laughing at a graduation party, a rusted wristwatch, and dozens of letters tied together with a now faded blue ribbon. The sender's name was handwritten clearly: David Evans. Jamie had never heard that name, but for Calista, it was both a quiet scar and a memory that never left her youth. That evening, at Jamie's apartment, Calista arrived unannounced, the box in hand. She didn't say anything, just placed it on the kitchen table. Jamie frowned. "What's that, Mom?" Calista sat down. Slowly. "There are things I should have told you a long time ago, but back then, I was scared, I was selfish, and I thought that silence was the best way to protect us both." Jamie stayed quiet. He didn't accuse, but he wasn't ready to forgive easily either. Calista opened the box and pulled out one of the letters. Her voice trembled slightly, like each word was a step through memory. "Callie, if you're reading this, it means I haven't given up. You said you needed time, but I think you need something else. You need to know that no matter what you decide, you won't be alone." Jamie read each letter in silence. David Evans, as she explained, had been a poor medical student working at a charity hospital where Calista interned the summer before her senior year. They'd fallen in love over night shifts and simple cafeteria meals. "You're the result of that summer," Calista said, staring into her now cold cup of tea. Jamie looked up, his voice hoarse. "Did he know?" "I'm not sure," she replied, pulling out the final letter. This was his last message sent before he left New York to join a medical mission in Africa. I never replied. When I found out I was pregnant, I didn't have the courage to contact him again. I chose to disappear, to go silent, the biggest mistake of my life. Jamie looked down at the handwriting, sincere, unpolished, but full of love. His chest tightened. "Is he still alive?" Jamie asked. Calista nodded slowly. "He might be. I heard he's still working with an international health organization, but I don't know for sure." Silence filled the room. After a while, Jamie exhaled. "Then find him. Not for me, for you. So it can finally close." Calista froze. She hadn't expected that kind of encouragement from the very son she once abandoned. Jamie got up to pour more tea. His voice softened, but stayed firm. "You once chose silence. Now you can choose to speak. Don't let the next generation pay the price for things that were never said." Outside, snow began to fall gently. Inside Calista, a new decision began to form this time, not to lose anything else worth keeping. On a late winter morning, just as sunlight brushed gold across the rooftops of Brooklyn, Calista Morgan sat quietly in her son's small kitchen, eyes fixed on the open laptop in front of her. The screen displayed the homepage of the international medical organization, Doctors for Humanity. Her hand paused over one name, Dr. David Evans, Regional Director, West Africa Mission Team. Her heart pounded loud enough to hear. Time had done nothing to erase the eyes behind that final letter, nor could it erase the memory of the man who had once waited for a reply that never came. That very afternoon, it was Jamie who clicked send for her. Just a single short line: "David, if you remember Calista Morgan, I'm the one you once wrote letters to. And I carry an apology that's long, long overdue." 3 days later, Callista's inbox showed a new message. She didn't dare open it. Jamie had to be the one to click. The email from Dr. Evans began with a simple sentence: "Calista, I never thought I'd ever read these words." What followed were long paragraph stories, details she thought had long been forgotten. He remembered the nights they spent together in the hospital courtyard. He remembered the blue dress she wore on their last day. And he remembered the hollow feeling when no reply ever came. He wrote, "I thought you had chosen a different life. I never blamed you. I only hoped you were happy. But if there's a part of the truth that was never spoken, then I'm here and willing to listen." A few weeks later, David flew in from Ghana, where he had lived and worked for nearly 15 years. The reunion between two people who once loved in silence, torn apart by status and expectation, was quiet. No tears, no accusations. Just the gaze of two people recognizing each other again, after a lifetime. Jamie watched from a distance as Calista walked forward, her hands trembling as she reached out. David didn't take her hand. Instead, he pulled her into a gentle, aching hug and whispered, "If I had known, I never would have left." Calista choked up. "If I had been braver, I wouldn't have made you wait." That night, for the first time in decades, Jamie sat at the same dinner table with the mother who had once abandoned him and the father he'd never met. 3 people, 1 table, a simple meal. But the air was heavy with all the things words couldn't quite hold. After dinner, Jamie asked, Do you regret it? David sipped his tea, eyes distant. I regret not searching for the truth sooner. But tonight, no, I don't regret anything. Calista looked at the two men before her, one, the youth she lost, the other, the life she once believed she didn't deserve to keep. She thought to herself, some relationships aren't meant to be whole, but to remind us of what was real, and of what we still have time to make right. The next morning, David prepared to return to Africa. Jamie took him to the airport. No big words, just a firm handshake. But as Jamie turned to go, David called out, if you ever want to, come to Ghana. No rush. Just, there are parts of the world and of yourself you can only understand when you step out of what's familiar. Jamie nodded. He didn't promise. But for the first time, something in his eyes looked lighter. As the plane took off, Calista and Jamie stood side by side at the international terminal, saying nothing, until Calista turned to her son and whispered, thank you for giving me a second chance. Not everyone is kind enough to do that. Jamie looked at his mother, the woman who had once chosen silence over truth, power over love, but who now stood beside him, smaller, but more real than ever. He smiled softly. We all need someone to forgive us, at least once in this life. 3 months after meeting his biological father, Jamie stood in the international terminal at JFK, holding a one-way ticket to Accra, Ghana. The backpack slung over his shoulder was like just a few clothes, an empty journal, and his mother's old wristwatch, the one thing he now carried everywhere. For weeks after the reunion, Jamie had been silent. He didn't ask his mother any more questions. He didn't text David, but he never turned down the open invitation to explore the rest of the truth. And now, on an early spring afternoon, Jamie boarded the plane, carrying with him all the things left unsaid, not fully understood, not entirely forgiven. 32 hours later, under the blistering West African sun, Jamie set foot on the land David called his second home. Kotoka Airport was smaller than Jamie expected, not as loud, not as busy as the terminals he knew in the US, but everything here moved slower breaths, steps, thoughts. A kind African woman greeted him with a warm smile. You must be Jamie. Welcome. Dr. Evans is waiting for you. The medical compound where David lived and worked wasn't a hospital, just a small clinic, a few exam rooms, and a row of simple huts used for emergency surgeries. Jamie stepped inside, expecting to see a wealthy old man in a white coat giving orders to a team of assistants. But no, his father was crouched down, bandaging a young boy's wounded leg. His shirt sleeves rolled up, his face streaked with sweat, his eyes steady and patient. When David looked up and saw Jamie, he simply said, "You made it." Jamie nodded. He didn't say anything. But in that moment, on unfamiliar ground, something connected. Not fully, but enough to begin. The days that followed were full of challenges. David didn't take Jamie sightseeing. He didn't book a hotel. He didn't mention Morgan Enterprises. Instead, he took Jamie to work every morning, helping clean surgical tools, make hospital beds, organize exam tables, or just sitting with children waiting for medicine. Whenever Jamie got tired or frustrated, David would quietly say, "No one's forcing you to stay. But if you want to understand life, not just mine, but your own, then stay one more day." And Jamie always stayed. On the 10th night, under the flicker of a dim oil lamp, David pulled out an old, faded photo. It showed a young Calista, radiant and smiling, standing next to a tiny medical tent in Kenya where they had first met. "Your mother once wanted to come back here," he said, his voice lower than usual, "but she chose you instead. She stayed, became a single mom, and gave up medicine. And I wasn't brave enough to go against my own family." Jamie was silent for a long time before he asked, "So now, what do you want?" David answered without hesitation, "I want to know who my son really is. Not the heir, not the Morgan. Just Jamie, who you are, when no one's telling you who to be." The next morning, Jamie woke before sunrise. He walked down to the small river behind the clinic, watching villagers move about, laughing, living simple but vibrant lives. And in that quiet, under the pale African light, Jamie finally began to understand, not just who his father was, but who he might become. For the first time in years, Jamie felt peace. No more city noise, no more stares from the media, no more pressure to be Calista Morgan's son or the future heir. Just a 24-year-old young man, learning to listen to himself again. That night, Jamie wrote his first letter home. "Mom, I'm okay. I know you used to think I couldn't live without what I was used to. Starbucks coffee, sealed conference rooms, or a phone that never stopped buzzing. But here, I've learned how to listen without needing to speak. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this: I'm ready to be no one but myself. And I'm ready to forgive you, him, and myself. 3 weeks later, on a drizzly spring afternoon in New York, Jamie stepped out of a taxi at the front gates of Morgan Tower, the building he once believed would define his future. Today, it looked the same: cold glass walls reflecting a gray sky, the rush of people in sharp suits, the quiet pull of power and wealth. But the person standing before it had changed completely. Jamie wasn't wearing a suit, just a sand-colored canvas jacket, a plain white shirt, and worn leather shoes that had traveled the world with him. His face was sun-kissed, his gaze calm, no longer the air trying to please anyone. On the 48th floor, inside a boardroom surrounded by glass, a shareholders' meeting was in full swing. Talks of expansion into Asia, AI investments, and executive restructuring filled the air. David Evans, the man the world called CEO, but whom Jamie now knew as his father, was watching the screen intently. Until the doors opened and Jamie walked in, the room fell silent. David stood at once. "Jamie?" Jamie nodded, unshaken. "I'm not here to interrupt, but if you have 10 minutes, I'd like to talk." In David's private office, a place that once made Jamie feel like a student before the headmaster, now no longer felt intimidating. David poured 2 cups of tea, not coffee, as a quiet way of saying, "I'm trying." Jamie spoke first. "I'm not accepting the inheritance." David nodded gently, as if he expected that. "But I will keep the Morgan name. Not for the wealth, but for Mom, because she believed that name one day could stand for something better." He paused, then looked directly at his father. "I'm going back to medicine. Not in luxury hospitals, but in community health like what you've done. Only in my own way." David exhaled a mix of relief and emotion. Almost whispering, he said, "That's all I ever hoped for." 1 week later, Emma, Jamie's best friend and former sanity check during cafe shifts, was wiping down tables when Jamie walked in. "Back for your usual watery espresso, Dr. Almost?" Jamie smiled. But this time, the smile wasn't hiding confusion or doubt. "I needed a favor. Name it. Help me start a mobile clinic. Something that moves through the city, serving the homeless, undocumented workers, and people like my mom used to be." Emma froze, the rag in her hand tightening. And this time, Jamie continued, "We'll do it right. No big names behind us. No family brand to lean on. Just us and our work." That evening, Jamie stood on the rooftop of his mother's old apartment building. In his hand was the same ring Emma once joked looked like it belonged to someone rich. He put it on not for display, but as a reminder of what had been lost, what had just been found, and the road that lay ahead. Above him, the city lights flickered, no longer overwhelming, but marking the beginning of a new chapter. On a crisp autumn morning, as yellow leaves scattered across Brooklyn sidewalks, Jamie and Emma stood in front of an old white van, carefully repainted. On its side, Morgan Street Care, community health for everyone. Jamie pressed the first clinic calendar onto the door, opening day. Below it, a map marked key stops, places where the unhoused gathered, where immigrants went unseen, where elderly neighbors were forgotten. No hospital went there. So they would. Emma handed him a black coffee, no sugar. "You sure about the name? Morgan Street Care still sounds kinda rich." Jamie smiled, but his eyes turned serious. "I'm keeping the name not for the money, but to give it a different meaning. It used to stand for power. From today, it'll stand for responsibility." That afternoon, in a city park near the southern borough, the van pulled up beside a line of tents. Jamie wore a stethoscope, taking blood pressure for an elderly black man. Emma spoke gently with a young pregnant woman. No high-end machines, just a fold-up cot, a box of basic meds, and open hearts. But in the eyes of the people they served, Jamie saw something he'd never seen in private clinics: trust and gratitude. A little boy tugged Jamie's sleeve and asked in a small voice, "Are you a real doctor, like the ones on TV?" Jamie chuckled and nodded gently. "Yeah, but no superpowers, just ears that listen and hands that work." A week later, at a small dinner party at Emma's place, a simple evening with homemade lasagna and a few bottles of cheap wine, David Morgan showed up unexpectedly. He didn't come alone. Beside him stood a calm-looking woman, modestly dressed, but with eyes full of quiet depth: Claire, Jamie's stepmother. Jamie opened the door, stunned. "I didn't think either of you would come." David gave a small nod, saying nothing as he handed Jamie a small envelope. Not a check. Don't worry. It's something you should see. Jamie opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, the shaky penmanship unmistakably his mother's address to Claire, written the year Jamie was born. In it, she wrote, "Dear Claire, if you're reading this, he's probably told you the truth. You owe me nothing. But if one day Jamie grows up and wants to know about his father, please let him know he was born from love, not a mistake. And that I blame no one. I just chose a different path." Jamie reached the final line, his throat tightening. Claire placed a hand gently on his shoulder, her gaze soft. She was brave. And so are you. The following weekend, Jamie was invited to speak at a community health conference. There were no bright spotlights on stage, no thunderous applause, just a microphone, a simple PowerPoint slide, and the hopeful faces of young doctors. Jamie spoke slowly. "I'm not here today as someone with the Morgan name. I'm here as the son of a single mother, a nurse who once worked triple shifts to put her son through school. And I stand here because I believe healthcare is not a privilege for the rich. It's a basic human right." The story closed with a quiet, heartwarming scene. Jamie, Emma, and David, three people from three very different worlds, sat together on a park bench on a Sunday afternoon, each holding a cup of vanilla ice cream. David, wearing jeans for the first time, joked, "It's been years since I had real ice cream with sugar." Jamie raised an eyebrow. "This is real ice cream. You'll get used to it." Emma laughed, then looked out toward the kids playing in the sunlight. "Family really is the one thing you can't build with money. You choose it, and you keep it with love." Jamie nodded, eyes lifting toward the endless sky. "And sometimes, you have to take the long way around to finally understand where you belong."